Welcome to another episode of Trends and Ideas. I'm your host, Beth Piscora, and our guest today is S&P Capital IQ ETF analyst Todd Rosenbluth, who is here to talk about mid-cap ETFs. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks, Beth. Good to be here.
So let's talk about mid-cap stock performance and the relative merits versus large cap or small cap.
Yeah, so mid-cap stocks are, of course, smaller than what you're going to see in the large cap space. They offer greater growth drivers. You tend to see the growth rates that are stronger than large cap stocks. But surprisingly, based on Capital IQ data and CompuStat data, they actually have lower debt to capital ratios. So they're not as risky from a balance sheet perspective as I think many people would expect.
Okay, and looking at the data, they're also outperforming this year. What do you think's behind that?
Yeah, so the mid-cap SP Index is outperforming the S&P 500 Index this year, as you correctly noted. What we think is happening there is it's got a little bit more cyclical slant. It's got more exposure to financial services, more exposure to industrial stocks than the S&P 500 sector, and those are two of the more economically sensitive sectors. We're seeing lots of good signs in the U.S. economy that we think is really what's driving that.
Okay. Now, when you look at the mid-cap space, and suppose you want to look at ETFs, the actively managed ETFs seem to be underperforming some of the more passive management style. What do you think's behind that?
Yeah, so the data from S&P Dow Jones Indices in their annual SPIVA report showed that the actively managed mutual funds are lagging significantly the broader S&P 400 benchmark. Mutual funds are going to be more expensive than the benchmark or an ETF alternative that's out there. And obviously management just is not making good stock picks. They have the opportunities to do so because a lot of these stocks are less followed in the mid-cap space than the large-cap space, but they're not doing so. And that's why we like ETFs as an alternative in the mid-cap space.
So in light of all of this, is there a recommendation or a stock, an ETF that you would recommend looking at in the mid-cap ETF space?
Yeah, so the iShares Core Mid-Cap ETF is one of the ones that we like. So it's the largest of those tied to the S&P 400 index. Very low expense ratio at just 15 basis points, tight bid-ask spread, lots of volume behind it. It's a good way to get exposure to the mid-cap space without taking that same active management risk that we've seen has failed many managers in the last decade.
Oh, sounds like a good one to take a look at. Thank you, Todd.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Beth.
your time. And we encourage all of our MarketScope.com subscribers to read more of Todd's views on MarketScope.com in a related Trends and Ideas article called Mid-Cap ETFs, Active versus Index. Until next time, thanks for watching or listening. I'm Beth Piscora for S&P Capital IQ.